Hiya. So it's me again, and today I've got another video for you guys. It's gonna be about one of the most important systems in the game that I think is entirely overlooked, all the way from the early game into the end stages of the game. This system is super useful, and it's exclusive to the GMS region only. This system actually isn't in KMS, so today I'm going to be discussing everything about familiars. This is it, my ultimate guide on familiars, every single thing that you need to know about them, all the little nooks and crannies are going to be covered in this video, because familiars are definitely something that you should start working on early, and then eventually when you do get back into it in the late stages, it's definitely something that'll boost your damage by an absolutely huge amount. So yeah, that'll be it. Hopefully you guys enjoy. Remember to like, comment, and sub, or I will literally eat your mesos faster than Star Forcing does. Thanks. So in order to get started with your familiars, you want to be accepting the quest that comes from this little machine box on the left. The first quest is called Roro and Me, but because I'm an idiot, I kind of just skipped through the dialogue that shows up in the first quest. It's nothing important, just a bunch of dialogue. Skip through it, and then another quest will show up, Roro's Function Report. When you accept this quest, it'll finally allow you to use your familiars. And another thing you want to be doing before you start your familiars is binding the key, because the only way to actually use and start, delving into the menus of familiars is making sure that the familiar key is bound to your keyboard. For me, I'm going to put it on F12, always F12 for me. And right in the beginning, you'll notice the overview. This is where you see the general information about what you're getting from your familiars and how much summon gauge you have left on your familiars. The summon gauge caps out at 2,000. And your summon gauge fills up every day, so don't be afraid to use your familiars. 2,000 out of 2,000 basically represents a little over 2 hours. I think it's like 2 hours and 5 minutes or 2 hours and 10 minutes. But yeah, so you get 2 hours of familiar usage a day, and you can replenish it even further by getting the familiar essence in the shop. This is something I highly suggest if you're doing long farming sessions. Yeah. When you do get familiars and familiar badges, any of the stats that you gain from those familiars will show up in the attributes menu. And these little card things are where your familiars show up when you unlock them. But yeah, the setup tab is basically setting up the presets for your familiars so that you can actually use your familiars. So I will throw in a pillaging wild boar, for example, and save it. Now, in order to actually use your familiars, once you do have them all set up, you will have a skill in your beginner tab called Summon Familiars. You want to bind that to a key and save it. Now, the Summon Familiars key is server-sided, so if it doesn't come out the first time, just make sure that you really press on the key. But you'll notice that my familiar right now has a big question mark on it, which means that right now the familiar isn't giving me any sort of stats. So when you go to the collection tab, that's where you can actually determine the stats for your familiars, extract your familiars for familiar points, and fuse them to get higher tier familiars. So for example, I will reveal the potentials on my familiars. It's just like cubing, so you click on the question mark and you see what kind of lines that you get. You'll notice a lot of similarities between this system and cubing. So let's just do that now. Okay, so let's go back to our setup tab and actually put that decent familiar that we got that gives us 1% crit rate and 1% attack. I'll save that preset, and when I go back to the overview, you'll notice that it'll give me 1% attack and 1% crit rate when I do have this familiar active. So let's see, my crit rate is actually 100%. Okay, well, notice my range because it gives me 1% attack. If I were to actually activate my familiars, you'll notice that my range will go up from 2,823,383 to... it should be... There you go. Okay, okay, that was really weird. It just summoned the wrong familiar, even though I did have the preset saved on this one. So you notice that my rage increases by roughly 20,000 just by having the familiar on or off respectively. It's taking a bit of time to update. Yeah. Obviously, this is just a very straightforward example. You can get a lot better effects from this. So essentially, when you have the common and the rare tier familiars, you can roll 15% ignore enemy defense. And this is what I suggest for early game, but I'll get into that in just a second. But yeah, so continuing on the collection section, the information tab is to help you view familiars and see what kind of stats you get on them, or reveal potentials, or anything like that. The extraction tab is to help you get rid of familiars. So if there's a potential that you don't like and you don't want to hold on to the familiar, then you can extract them for familiar points. So for example, I'm going to extract all of my familiars, and that'll give me 415 familiar points that you can use in the familiar shop. Obviously, you can use the points towards giving yourself more summon gauge, which is what I just recommended. Booster packs, which are sometimes okay if you do have an excess of points. And more presets if you do want to use more presets, or if you have different bosses that you clear and have different familiars that you use for different bosses. And Fusion. Fusion basically is a system that allows you to rank up your familiars by fusing multiple of the same familiar into one. So for example, let me go to my storage and grab some Forbarian familiars. So if I register a Forbarian familiar to my my familiar system, I can go to Fusion and obviously fuse more Forbarians into it to give it XP to rank it up from rare to epic. Note that in order to actually rank up the familiar needs to be level 5. In order to level up the familiars, you need to make sure that that specific familiar is summoned, and you're killing mobs with that specific familiar. But yet again, I'll get into that in just a second. But yeah, once you have 100 XP, you should be able to rank it up once it's level 5. But that's pretty much it for the collection tab. There's not really much, it's not really confusing once you actually toy around with the menus a little bit and see what does what. Next is the badge menu. When you go to the badge menu, it's exactly as this says, a whole lot of nothing. But the badge menu starts to come together once you go to list and you start filling out the list here. So basically, badges are something that you can equip once you have all of the familiars from a specific region. Notice how in the Apocalypse badge, I got the Forbarian familiar. The Forbarian familiar is a part of the Apocalypse badge, and when I get the other 4, I will be able to unlock it and equip it. So once I do unlock that badge, it'll show up in my equipped badges. In the badges owned, and I can equip that and get the stats from it. Specific badges have different stats, and stats cap out from the badges. So some badges will cap out at 3 times the stats that are given. So you can only get a maximum of 3% attack from familiar badges. Or other stats that might be useful, like ignore monster defense caps out at 5 times its value, so you can only cap out at a max value of 15% ignore enemy defense. Or other stats like crit rate, damage, or all stats percent. They cap out at 3 times their value. So 3% all stat 3% damage. So you can obviously stack these 3 times over. So if you get the Labyrinth badge, all stats, damage, so on and so forth. But yeah, that's it for badges. Fairly straightforward. How that conjoins with familiars, I'll say in just a second. But yeah, and then there's the shop. Personally, I don't really recommend anything from the shop besides the familiar essence, booster pack, and the familiar preset coupon. Having badge presets doesn't really help, and the suspicious familiar only gives familiar experience. So for 5,000 points, I don't really recommend it because it's quite expensive. But yet again, there's nothing here that's entirely terrible. It's just some purchases are much better than others, especially the familiar essence, because getting your familiars back is definitely very nice. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the generic menu and how to deal with everything in the familiar menu. So now it's only natural to ask the question, where do I get familiars? Familiars are exclusively only a drop from monsters. They drop in the early regions of the game. Monsters before level 200 all the way until future Pyrion. And they also drop in the Arcane River only from Morass and beyond, excluding Celas. So all 3 regions of Tenebris, Asphera, and Morass. And they do not drop in Cernium and beyond, so no Hotel Arcus and no Burnium. Familiars do drop in 2 rarities, one being common and one being rare. Common is usually 10 times more common than a... common is 10 times more common than a rare familiar. Yeah, let me just showcase what getting a familiar looks like. So let me just go hit some boars. Okay, there you go. And after like a solid 30 seconds of hitting monsters, I got a familiar. Now note, familiars are affected by drop rate. So obviously the more drop rate that you have, the more familiars that you acquire. Also, it's also dependent on the kill speed. So the more mobs that you can kill within an hour, the more familiars that you can potentially acquire. Usually when you're farming in the endgame regions, you should be able to gather a couple stacks within a couple hours. But yeah. Once you get your familiars, just use them and see what you get. I will also showcase this here. So with an active familiar, as you kill monsters, when the familiar is active, you will gain some experience to level up your familiars. So for example, I'm just going to do it with this common familiar. So you need to make sure that the familiars are active. You will see it by the buff in the window over here. Okay, so there you go. So I hit a couple mobs. Note that the monsters have to be around your level. But once you do hit some mobs, you'll notice that my Pillaging Wild Boar does have some green little experience, if you can see right under the level meter. So you can see under that it gains some experience. And obviously when that bar fills up, it goes to level 2 and repeat until level 5. Now note when you do get to level 5, you can finally take the time to rank up your familiar. So I'll probably showcase what a rank up looks like. So probably just take a second to get to level 5, shall we? Okay. Oh my god, that is not for the faint of heart. Yet again, so personally, I suggest only leveling up familiars. If you are a late to end game player, realistically, if you're in the early game, you should not be focusing on familiars, because not only are you not able to get them, but ranking them up is impossibly hard. As you can see, just for me to rank up once from rare to epic, it's taking me 22 minutes. But yeah. So once you do finally get your familiar to level 5, you go back to your collection tab and fusion, and then when you do click on the familiar, the rank up button will be shining. Now, to go from rare to epic, there's an 80% chance to succeed. Now, if you fail, you'll lose half your XP, and you need to gain that XP again and just click up the rank up button again. You won't need to level up the familiar again. Once you hit level 5, the familiar is done until the next rank. Once it hits epic, you need to level it up again. But yeah, so let's see. Let's test the 80% chance. Hopefully I get it. Okay, and we got it. So now it's epic, but you can notice that the level of the familiar is back to level 1. But yet again, so if I were to get this thing to unique, I need to get 150 familiars and test it at a 40% chance instead of an 80% chance. Same rule applies here. If you fail, you lose half your familiar XP, so it goes to 75, and then you rank it up to unique. Once you get a familiar to unique, you can't rank it up any further. You can only rank it up in the regular servers, but yet again, this is directed towards Reboot. But yeah. So ranking up familiars, fairly simple. Just fuse them and level them up. So let's see what I get on this epic familiar. Garbage. That's what we get. But notice the lines that you get on epic familiars, and familiars in general. So familiars work just like cubes. The first line is always of the tier that the familiar is at. So because this is an epic familiar, I can get epic tier lines, which includes 30% boss, 30% IED, item drop rate by a large amount, which is 100% drop rate, and recovers party HP by a large amount, which is around, I think, 20 to 30% of your HP every time it ticks. So there are some key lines to go for once you do hit epic. Ideally, you want to be going for increases item drop rate by a large amount, because 100% drop, progressing to the later stages of the game, where you are fighting bosses and looking for pitch drop equipment, getting this familiar is definitely very helpful. But yet again, that's for when you get there. The line under this one is going to be rare, so just like cubes, when you do have, for example, a unique potential, the first line is a unique line, and the lines under that are epic lines. But the only difference with potentials is that the second and third line can be of the same tier. They can be unique tier lines. For familiars, that cannot happen. Yeah. So that's pretty much how you rank up a familiar. Yeah. That's pretty much everything you need to know about familiars. I will give some tips and tricks on ideally what you should be aiming for as you progress into the game. So, there are 2 stages of familiars, the early game and the late and end game familiar stages. So when you first start out the game, there's only 2 things that you want to do. First is getting the starter badge. The reason why the starter badge is useful is because when you unlock one badge, you will be able to unlock the second familiar slot, which I should probably discuss now. So when you first start out familiars, you'll only have one familiar slot. But when you unlock your second badge, you'll be able to unlock your second familiar slot. And then when you have 10 badges across the entirety of your character, then you can unlock your third familiar. The reason why having multiple familiars is good is because you can stack multiple effects. So for example, if I have 2 familiars that have 30% boss, then that means that I gain 60% boss. That's why that's good. So ideally, for the early game, you want to be unlocking the starter badge, and you want to be looking for 2 common familiars that have 15% ignore enemy defense. Because common and rare familiars can roll 15% ignore enemy defense, it's very good for helping you hit the early bosses and doing your maximum damage against them. So I'm just going to showcase that now. I'm just going to go get my starter badge and roll a couple familiars that I have in my storage until I do get, the ignore enemy defense familiars that I'm looking for. So let's just make sure. So the starter badge is consisted of, or even the oppressor badge works. So I'm probably going to go for the oppressor badge because it's actually simpler than the starter badge. You go for the grape juice bottle, the potted morning glory, and the potted sprout, which is an Edelstein. So I'm going to go there. And I'm going to hit these mobs until I get their familiars and until I unlock my first badge. So we're probably going to speed this part up a little bit, because it's going to take a little while. So, like an idiot, in my last recording, I actually had myself muted. So everything that I was saying kind of just went in the garbage. So I actually took the time to farm out the oppressor badge, which consists of the 3 starter familiars in Edelstein. Where you fight the grape juice bottle, potted morning glory, and potted sprout. So I equipped that badge, and then there is a quest that shows up on the left. I'll probably have some footage of me going through the dialogue. With that same familiar icon that shows up on the left over here. It's called Roro's First Function Report or something like that. When you do click it and go through it, your second familiar slot obviously will open. And then I've taken the time to open up some familiars that I've already had on my account. And I've rolled one 15 IED line. This is the jackpot line that you typically want to be going for. But there are other useful lines. I'll showcase some of them. So attack 1%, crit rate 1% is always nice. So if you do get 6 to 8 or 4 to 5 crit rate, that's good. Increases item drop rate by a small amount, or increases item drop rate is nice. Item drop rate by a small amount increases your item drop rate by 30%, while increases item drop rate increases your drop rate by 60%. Increases item and meso drop rate by a small amount is also good because this increases your item and meso drop rate by 30%. And then obviously attack percent and other lines that may be, good for your class, right? Ideally, you can only roll increases item drop rate on rare, and rare familiars are obviously a lot more consistent when it comes to rolling ignore enemy defense. So I'm just going to take a second to continue rolling familiars until I find the second IED familiar. And there you go. Okay, so we hit the second one for 15 IED. 2% dex is also nice, but yet again. And this was on a common line too, as you can tell, because it was on the second line. So, yet again, obviously rolling rare familiars is much better than common ones, but if commons are the only things you have, then it's fine. So once again, as you can tell, just by shortly farming some familiars for the second badge slot, and turning on my 2 familiars that have 30% or 15% IED, my ignore enemy defense goes from 83.41 to... Come on, you can update already. There we go. To 88.2%. So I gained 5% IED just by doing something as simple as that. And if you want me to translate that into English, basically what that means is my damage against a Vellum increases by 15%. Overall, that is final damage just by doing that. And obviously, when I kill Vellum, I can have a second preset where I increase my item drop rate by a small amount and my IED. So now, if I do kill Vellum and I do want some more drops, more familiars, I turn this familiar on, and obviously I take out Vellum and call it a day. Or whatever boss you might be fighting. But yeah, so ideally this is what an early game setup for familiars would look like. Something like this, 2 familiar slots is all you need. I will now showcase what a late to end game familiar setup will look like. Okay, so I'm now on my main, and I'm gonna show you guys what the end game familiar setup will look like. So for my badges, I'm equipping pretty much any badge that gives me any sort of damage, crit rate, or IED. So the Swamp badge from Morass gives me 1% all stat to attack. The Apocalypse badge from hitting level 255 gives me 1% attack and 2 attack. The Depths badge gives me 1% attack, 3% IED from the Mineral badge, Lion badge, 1% attack, Labyrinth badge, 1% all stat, 1% damage. This is from hitting level 250. The Ocean badge for hitting level 235 and unlocking a Sphera gives 1% crit rate, 1% damage, and then the Rebel badge, which gives me 1% crit rate. I should probably say there are some badges in this list that you do want to avoid, because sometimes there'll be cards that seem pretty much unobtainable because there are bosses and things that have such a small kill rate that you pretty much are unable to actually, you know, get the familiars in question, right? So for example, if I were to go to the Future badge, I have to pretty much get all of the familiars, including the Chief Knights, which only spawn when you kill the Empress Cygnus. So pretty much this badge is impossible. Even though it does give nice stats, it's definitely hard to hit. The only way that you actually can hit these familiars is through the familiar booster pack coupon. But yeah, so that's what my badges look like. In terms of my familiars, I have 2 presets. One is my bossing preset, where I have a boss familiar that gives me 30% boss damage, another boss familiar that gives me 35% boss damage, and it restores HP and MP to my nearby allies. And this goes over potion lock effects, so surviving becomes a lot easier when these kinds of familiars are equipped. And then another familiar that gives me large HP regeneration to my party members and 30% ignore monster defense. So this is what I would be equipping when I'm bossing. And then if I want drops, I have increases item drop rate by a large amount. Now this line is very important. You need to make sure that it is only item drop rate by a large amount. When you do hit this line, it will increase your item drop rate by 100%, which is absolutely massive no matter what stage of the game you're in. The next familiar, 6% attack, so this is good for killing mobs because it increases my range by a large amount. And then boss damage, 35%. The only reason why I have this on is because just in case if I'm fighting bosses and I do need that extra damage to kill them, it makes it so that when I switch into drop familiars, it's, I'm not losing, as much damage or as significant as an amount. But yeah, that's pretty much what an endgame familiar setup would look like. I pretty much don't need to touch familiars until the end of time. I do have 14,900 familiar points, so if I ever need to refill on familiars, I can do so. It only costs 300 to fill up half the gauge, or to get your familiars again for an hour. And I do have a lot of extra familiars in my inventory, so if I do need extra points, or if I do want to transfer to my mules and give them the badges from the end game, or just extra familiars so that they can roll into IED as well, is what I have this for. But yeah, that's pretty much it for what an endgame familiar setup looks like. Now, one last thing to note about familiars. You can rename familiars if you do hit familiars that you are going to use. So, for example, because this is an attack familiar, I can call this attack familiar. Okay, it can only be 12 letters long, but I'm gonna call it attack fam. And obviously it'll use money. What is that? That's 2 mil? 2 mil. 2 mil to rename it. Not really a hefty amount, but if you do hit that point and you do want to rename your familiars, just that you're a little more organized when shifting through the menu. But yeah, I think I've covered pretty much everything there is about familiars. So that'll conclude this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. And remember to like, comment, and sub, or I will literally eat your mesos faster than Star Forcing does. Thank you. Much love.